Good morning, everybody. Good to see you today, and glad that you're here. I hate time change Sundays. I think I'm going to run for president, and my platform's going to have one thing: stop the time change Sundays. It's a tough. All those subdued. Even when we're here, we're just subdued on time change Sundays. So especially when we lose the hours and things. So it's good to be with you. We're wrapping up today. Tomorrow, I get on a plane to New Zealand, and then on to Australia. Next Sunday, I'll be speaking at a small church near Peregian Springs, Australia. That's on the Gold Coast area, the resort area of Australia. So we have one of our workers lives there, and so I'll be over there with them and having a good time. I'm not looking forward to the 15-hour flight from Dallas, Fort Worth to Auckland, New Zealand, and coming back Sydney to Dallas. So Dallas is now the entry point for the flights to down under. So anyway, I'd appreciate your prayers tomorrow if you think of me. It's going to be a very long day. In fact, it's so long, I take off, it's Monday. When I land, it's Wednesday. Cross the international date line and all that, you know. And so it's kind of a weird thing. I'm looking at my ticket, my flight information. So anyway, I appreciate your prayers on that. Well, this is the last vision of Daniel we're going to cover, and it's 3 chapters, but I'm going to not go into some of the nitty-gritty of the historical section in chapter 11, but we'll talk about it. But I want to, we just can't cover every single verse. So just give you the high points of this. And we're going to start, by the way, that's a bust of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the little horn in Daniel chapter 8. And on the left, you can't see it very well, is a relief, bas relief of a Persian king, Xerxes. If you know your history, Ahasuerus is his Persian name. That's the way it's given in Esther. The Greeks called him Xerxes. And you may have seen some of the movies, and he is portrayed as a really weird person. And one of the reasons is he was a really weird person. That's what they say, the records say. So they probably overdosed it in the movies, though, just for effect. I want to... the outline is given you first point in the handout. There are handouts, extra ones, I think, laid in the back. There's a preparation for the vision, which is essentially chapter 10. The vision goes from the second verse of 11 through 12:3. And then there's the final instructions to Daniel and kind of an epilogue, wrap-up section to the book of Daniel and to that vision. But we have 2 main issues in chapter 10. There is the identities of the personages in there, and I'm using the word personage because it can be a human or an angel or something else, and the issue of territorial spirits, those 2 things. So let's look at these, starting first with the identities. The purple side is not purple in my notes, in my copy. So, can you see that on the left? Can you see it good enough? The question is 1 or 2. Is there 1 person in the chapter, or 2? And what's the issue? You have on one hand you have a man in verses 5 and 6, early part of that chapter. Let's look at it. It's in the 3rd year of Cyrus. That means 536 BC, right about there. King of Persia. A word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar, and the word was true, and it was great, and it was a great conflict, and he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. So he tells us ahead of time, Daniel understands the vision. That doesn't mean he knows the fulfillment of the vision. A lot of people make that mistake. They think fulfillment is understanding. No, he understood the words of the text, predicting that this king will do this and this king will do that. He doesn't know the names of those kings. It's only later in history and fulfillment that we see those things. Okay. Verse 2, in those days I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. That's pretty stout. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen. Okay, so it's a man, described as a man, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. Now, who is this personage? If you look at, I give two passages. I go back to Daniel 7 and the Ancient of Days description. And there's some similarities in the Ancient of Days. Was on his throne, his hair was white as snow. We don't have that here, but his throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. And bronze is a symbol of judgment, often carries that idea. And they would use bronze as if they were going to put a picture, kind of a picture up of fire. They put bronze sometimes for that. And so there's a judgment scene there. But then if you go over to Revelation chapter 1, it's even clearer. Revelation chapter 1, verse 11, we have the portrait of Jesus. Verse 12, starting verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. That's like Daniel 7, isn't it? His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. Something we see in this passage. And so what we probably have here in the case of that section is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. So it seems to be divinity. It's God himself in the person of Christ. That's the way I take that, a pre-incarnate understanding of Jesus. Now, the second personage in the passage is where most of the arguing goes, if you read the commentaries. And some say that continues to talk about Christ. I have some problems with that because it goes on to say for 21 days he's kept from coming. And I don't think Jesus would be kept from coming, okay, as we look through the passage. So it's something else going on with that person. But let's look at that. If you come down to verse 10 in chapter 10. And behold, okay, by the way, when he was confronted with this first personage, he falls down, okay, on his face in deep sleep. And then verse 10, and behold, a hand touched me. So the issue is it the hand of the first personage, or is it somebody else? Okay? And set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright. For now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and I came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. So the second personage looks like an angelic figure. He's been sent to Daniel. He's hindered and helped by angelic creatures. Okay? So this person I take as an angelic messenger. Probably, he's not named, probably Gabriel, because he's showing up everywhere else. But we don't know that for sure, but it's probably Gabriel. that's hindered. And the second issue, okay, so the first issue is how many personages? I think there are two. I think the first one is in a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. The second one is an angel. The first one is not an angel because of the comparisons to Daniel 7 and Revelation chapter 1. Okay? Now, the second issue in the chapter is territorial spirits. Now, a territorial spirit, well, I'm using that term, and the term is used that way, to refer to good and bad angels assigned to kingdoms or nations. Okay, I'm going to assume nations. We saw through the passage that you have the prince of the kingdom of Persia in verse 13. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Doesn't sound like a man, a king or something. Doesn't sound like that. And then later it says Michael, you come down to verse 21, at the very end, it says, I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There's none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. Your prince. So you have the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and then you have Michael, your prince, who's your, talking about the Jewish people. So it's Israel. It's the prince of Israel. You go over to chapter 12, verse 1. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. Okay. So Michael is later on, we're told in the New Testament, he's the archangel. And so we understand him to be an angelic feature. Chief angel is what archangel means, kind of the lead angel. And so he's named, and the unnamed prince of Persia seems to be a bad guy because he's fighting against this, who might be Gabriel. I'll call him Gabriel, okay, Gabriel. And then Michael's helping, okay? And again, one of the reasons I don't think that second personage is Jesus or God is that, he's in this battle and he's held up for 3 weeks. I don't see that happening. So you have also the prince of Greece is mentioned. You go back to chapter 10, verse 20, go up a verse. Do you know why I've come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. It's starting to get complicated. So, what do we take from this kind of language that's in the Bible? And again, when you think about that, the unseen, cosmic unseen world, and remember, we're supernaturalists. We don't believe, we're not naturalists. We don't believe nature is all there is to reality. There's a cosmic unseen world. There's angels, there's demons, there are other things, there's God. All of the other unseen world of heaven and hell, those things. We believe in those things. There's a cosmic unseen world. And apparently, God has assigned his messengers to lead or be attached to or protect or defend nations. And the bad guys also have their guys assigned to nations. So that's what we see, this spiritual conflict in the cosmic unseen world, but it reflects the nations. Okay, now, we want to be careful not to make too much of it or too little of it. The fact of the matter is, you stop and think about that. In Matthew 18, it appears like we have guardian angels. You've heard that, right? There at least it talks about the possibility there of guardian angels. Okay, so do I have one guardian angel? Pastor Brian probably needs 10. Okay, everybody has guardian angels. How many does the United States have? I don't know how many good angels, bad angels fighting over us. We don't know. Now, some people will take this and they'll do territorial mapping, and they'll try to figure out in their neighborhood and try to work that out. Here's the key thing on that. God never tells us, even though we know there's this conflict, unseen cosmic conflict, he never tells us to engage it. He tells us to draw near to God, and he'll draw near to us. Resist the devil by drawing near to God. Ephesians 6, we resist Satan, the armor of God, prayer, faith, salvation, those things. So in other words, we live our Christian life to the fullest, saturated with his word. That's how we go after Satan and his dominion. We don't engage it in some unique, special, mystical kind of way. But a lot of people are given to that. So, but you just stick your nose to the grindstone. God's taking care of that. He knows what's going on. He's got it taken care of. And he's also got it taken care of down here. But we have our place here. So let's focus on that. Okay? So there is this, I do believe, in territorial spirits. Years ago, there were some novels that came out. Frank Peretti. Do you guys remember Frank Peretti novels? I read them and I enjoyed them as fiction. But that's what they were, fiction. And one of the fundamental anti-biblical views of that is that people's prayers strengthen angels. That's never taught in the Bible. In fact, the verse is true. Angels strengthen men and women. We don't strengthen angels. So he had that backwards. And also, I was a little concerned, though, the Bible was not very prominent in his novels. Well, prayer was, and that was a good thing. But there was this elaborate construction of things, and I want to be careful not to take that too far. But I do believe in the existence of territorial spirits. The text seems to say that, so I just accept that at face value. Chapter 11 are prophecies about Persia, Greece, and the end times, Rome. Now you say, well, this is getting a little repetitive. Yes, it is. In fact, again, I told you, and I'm not going to go into the detail of it, there is a more complicated chiastic structure, that parallel structure. Remember, 2 goes with 7, 3 with 6, 4 with 5. In the last part of the book, there's 1, 2, but it doesn't follow chapter divisions. So it makes it a little more difficult. But you have, you're going to have him go back and re-look at, again, it's a separate vision, but they're going to briefly talk about Persia. I mean, very briefly. And then very briefly talk about the beginnings of the Greek Empire, but then get into the details of the Greek Empire. And that's the little horn, eventually leading to the little horn out of the Third World Empire. Remember that in chapter 8? And then it moves to the little horn out of the Fourth World Empire, Daniel 7, as we go through that. So that's where I put the end times or Rome. Okay, so let's look at that. Prophecies about Persia, verses 1 and 2 in chapter 11. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, now who's talking here? This is not Daniel. This is Gabriel. I'll call him Gabriel, okay? As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him, that is Darius. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. I've listed the kings here. You need to memorize that. We're going to have a test on Friday. I'll send you an email from New Zealand, okay? Cambyses, Cyrus's son, 530 BC. Pseudo-Smyrtus, he had a short-lived empire, 522. Darius, Hystaspes, 521 to 486. And then there's Ahasuerus or Xerxes, okay, considered the greatest of all Persian kings. Okay, remember he brought Esther into his harem, 485 to 465. And he was the greatest of their kings. And we don't have it here in the Bible, but we do know that just a statement. He shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Well, for 20 years, he tried to take over Greece. So he sent his empire, his soldiers, his armies, big fleets, everything, and worked to try to take over the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire was very small. It wasn't a big thing. It was really just a bunch of city-states, right? They hadn't really gotten together and gone. There was that battles constantly, and he failed miserably. He did set Athens on fire, but he never could take over. They pushed him out. That's what that verse just gives a little glimpse of that. He shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Now, when is Daniel writing? He's in the 530s BC. He's looking down the road. And this is 200 years almost later. 100 years later. And then the Persian Empire, after this guy, continues with weaker kings, off and on, trying to go after Greece. Now, when is the heyday of Greece? Remember that? Alexander? Where do we play on the timeline? Where is he? 330s BC. Okay. Now, you look, eventually then, this stirring up that takes place, I think it starts with this guy, and then you have verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, because he didn't have any children. This is Alexander. Nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. And so, we've had this already, right? It's repetitive. Alexander rose up very quickly, went across like the leopard with wings, conquers Persia, goes all the way to India, gets Israel. Then he dies at 33 years old. And his kingdom is divided into four parts. And we saw that before. It's Alexander the Great, the fragmentation of the Greek Empire. And remember, I gave you a picture of a map with these people on it. Lysimachus, Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy. And there's the territory that they had. The two key ones are, for us, Seleucus and Ptolemy. Why? Because Ptolemy's Egypt, Seleucus is Syria, and what's in between? Israel. Okay. So the prophecy then moves at that point to prophecies about the Egyptian and Syrian, I'm calling them the Egyptian-Syrian events. Okay. The battles between Egypt, the Ptolemies, and Syria, the Seleucids, from 5 to 35. Now, during this whole time, Israel never has control of its own territory. Israel's oppressed under the thumb. They have a little reprieve later on in the 2nd century when the Maccabees rise up and kick out Antiochus Epiphanes. But early on, they don't. And so you have these battles back and forth, and Israel's sometimes under Persians, sometimes they're under the Syrians. Now, I have 4 slides, which I put a copy of it in your notes. Again, that's part of the test for Friday. South and north. These verses I've attached to names. And you can go to any of the commentaries and they'll kind of lay this out historically. Even the liberals will agree with these labels. And that, you remember, it's so precise that they'll say it's written after the fact, not written beforehand, because God, they don't believe in supernaturalism, so God, the creator of the universe, cannot pre-write history. That's how they look at that. So you have Ptolemy the first, his dates, Ptolemy the second, his daughter. A lot of these things are mentioned. Laodice is mentioned in the text, or at least the wife is mentioned in the text. And so you have the names not in the text, but the details are summarized in the text. Now you got that one memorized. We go to the second slide. Ptolemy the third, Ptolemy Philopator, and then the other guys from Syria, the Battle of Raphia, 70,000 troops on each side, and Syria is badly beaten in that time. So sometimes Syria loses, sometimes Egypt loses. Okay? Back and forth. And Israel is just getting walloped in the middle. You know, one of the places where the armies meet the most is the Valley of Jezreel. Now, how many of you went to Israel? Okay. You remember the Valley of Jezreel? Napoleon fought there. I mean, there have been a lot of battles throughout history. Fought in the Valley of Jezreel. The little southwest corner of that is a little hill called Megiddo, Armageddon, the mountain of Megiddo. And we know there's going to be one last battle. Converges there. I think it goes elsewhere, but it converges there according to Revelation chapter 16, the end time great battle. So we talk about Armageddon all the time. That's where it comes from. Well, they're fighting these battles, many of them in that plain. Why? Because there's room there to fight. They don't like to fight in the mountains. They like to get out in the open and fight that way. I'd prefer to hide in the mountains. And on the south, there's Ptolemy Epiphanes, who was there kind of a long time. North, you have Antiochus the Great. The Cleopatra lady I mentioned there is not the Cleopatra of later Mark Antony fame. And then you have this other guy, Seleucus, who paid taxes to Rome, collected taxes from Jews, and mysteriously poisoned. Now, what's interesting is that Rome, we know historically that Rome has started to already come in. I mean, Rome takes over, really strongly in the 1st century BC, but it's already showing influence way before that time. And there's threatenings, and they're on the horizon. The people from the west, remember the name for those people? It's in this text, the Kittim, the people from the west coming in and causing trouble. So we know historically, the historical records tell us about these taxes and those kind of things. Okay, now that you have that one memorized, continues on that. Then we have Antiochus Epiphanes. He's the guy we talked about in chapter 8, reacted to the Jews, the little horn of chapter 8. And remember what he did. He got mad. He tried to take over Egypt and failed, got mad, went against the Jews, and because they didn't like him either. And they let it be known. Okay. And so he put the statue of Zeus on the Temple Mount. And he rubbed pig fat on the walls of the temple. Everything he could to irritate the Jews. And, of course, kept them from doing their worship and sacrifice on the Temple Mount. Okay? That's exactly what the Antichrist is going to do. The little horn out of the fourth world empire, same as the little horn out of the third world empire. Antiochus is a type, a picture of the little horn out of the fourth world empire that is to come, the Antichrist. And Antichrist will, 2 Thessalonians 2:4, set himself up in the temple as if he is God. The Jewish temple, I take it, as we look at that. So this takes us down to this Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, what's the significance of all these things? So what? We got a list of things, and we can map it to these historical facts. Okay, let's walk through that. The prophecies are so precise that liberals and secularists say that Daniel had to be written after the fact. The main issue is supernaturalism versus naturalism. And we are on the side of the supernaturalists. We believe in God, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he can pre-write history. We believe that. The Creator God, who we believe, at least I believe, is outside of time, is fully qualified to pre-write history. Remember that the doctrine of the creation is really important, because almost everything else the Bible talks about that's miraculous is possible because you have a creator. See, we're in a theistic universe. We have a infinite creator God who's all powerful. And if you believe that, if that's actually what's the case, and it is, then resurrection is a minor miracle. Then pre-writing history is a minor miracle. Healing someone is a minor miracle. So we don't have any problem with those things actually having happened in history and God pre-writing history. So that's the significance, and that's one of the chapters, because the details are so precise, that the secularists fight the most in Daniel chapter 11. But they fought in other places, as you know. Then we move to beginning in verse 36. There seems to be a shift. And it's part of the structure again, I think, of going from the third world kingdom to the fourth world kingdom. And at the end of at the end of verse 35, it says, until the time of the end. Some of the wise will stumble, they be refined, purified, made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. That language, I think, helps suggest a shift. And the king shall do as he wills. And he shall exalt himself, magnify himself above every god, shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. Now, when you think through all this, it ends up, this section continues and ends in chapter 12. And what do we have in chapter 12? At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt and resurrection. So this section, and I give reasons why I think this is of the last days, the reference until the end time, and 12:4 mentions the end time of chapter 12. They're like, those verses are like bookends. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. So those section goes together as a unit. And the extent of the details does not continue in application for Antiochus Epiphanes. A lot of the other things do, but this section doesn't. So I think it's talking about the little horn out of the fourth world empire. There's no historical fulfillment. And then the tribulation that's mentioned in 12:1. Notice how it's described again. I read that just now. There shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. Worst time ever. And Jesus even says in Matthew 24, no time like it before or after. Joel also references this in Joel chapter 2. This time that's coming at the end of history, the worst time ever. Okay. Revelation 6-19 gives the details of that. Jesus gives some also in Matthew 24. So you have the tribulation, the resurrections are mentioned, and then the rewards. Notice the rewards in verse 3. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. It doesn't mean you're going to be an angel after you die and you become a star in the sky like Clarence. If you remember that reference in the movie, okay. That's not what that means. He's just talking about rewards. We're going to be shining forth. It says, those who are wise and who turn many to righteousness. So it's a reward to specific things that you do, the way I look at that. So these things, this list of things, makes me think this section is talking about the section at the end times. And this king who's the little horn out of the fourth world empire, we call him the Antichrist. Remember in chapter 7, we talked about him, we called him the Antichrist. And one of the debates is, in this whole section, you've got Syria and Egypt. King of the north, king of the south. King of the north, king of the south. Constantly all the way through this passage. King of the north, king of the south. One of the debates is, and it's hard because of knowing the antecedents of the Hebrew pronouns. What's he talking about? Which was he referencing? Is this little horn out of the fourth world empire one of those two? Well, he's not going to be Egyptian. Okay, some think Syrian, and there's an ancient tradition of the church that says the Antichrist is a Syrian Jew. But I don't think he's going to be a Jew. I mean, the Antichrist might be a Jew, but I don't think coming out of the Syrian part in this chapter, that doesn't seem to fit to me. So I tend to have the European view of the Antichrist coming out of Europe. The fourth world empire is Rome. So I tend to see it that way. But some people look at it that way. It's also, if the little horn out of the fourth world empire, the Antichrist, is a third person. And that's the way I lean in the passage, the way the pronouns are, that these two are fighting, but eventually, and he's down there defending Israel. Because remember, he makes a treaty with Israel, beginning of the 70th week. Remember that treaty in Daniel chapter 9? So he's defending Israel in the middle of that. Okay. And what happens is, I think, they're turning on him because he's fighting them, but then he wins. The Antichrist wins, and notice what happens at the very end of chapter 11. Verse 42, he shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Okay, that's, by the way, and it says up earlier in the section on Antiochus Epiphanes from Syria that he didn't take Egypt. That's a distinction. Here, this guy takes Egypt. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. So he's really pushing out. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him. Some take that as a reference to the allusion to the coming battle of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And if that's true, then that battle will be placed late in the first half of the trib. It's hard to know. The date on that one is so hard to know. And he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction, and he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea, that's the Mediterranean, and the glorious holy mountain, Temple Mount. So he sets up his kingdom headquarters in Israel. And of course, we know eventually he sits in the temple as God. But then notice, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. So he's destroyed. I once had my Roman Catholic boss back in my engineering days came into my office. It was the time, I think the movie The Omen had come out, which I didn't watch. But he came in and said, Mike, does the Antichrist win in the end? What kind of question is that? Does the Antichrist win in the end? He's Roman Catholic. Have you ever read your Bible at all? No. He shall come to his end with none to help him. And you want to see that in more graphic detail, go to Revelation 19. When he is pitched into the lake of fire alive. So we have this story here, chapter 11, a lot of detail. Shift to the end times at the very last section of that. I wish we had more time to go into it, but we have the little horn of the third world empire, a picture of the little horn out of the fourth world empire, and he is destroyed at the second coming. Remember where this ends up. This ends up in the resurrection. When's the resurrection? One's at the rapture. Then I held to a pre-trib rapture. But then there's a resurrection at the end of the trib as well. Old Testament saints, I think, probably, and the trib saints who've died are raised from the dead there. So there's a resurrection there. That's at the second coming of Jesus. And so it's a glorious time. And all of this is couched in detailed history. You see, we as Christians have a historical faith. Our faith is rooted and grounded in historical facts. Jesus was raised from the dead or he wasn't. Historically true or not, he was historically raised from the dead. We believe that with all of our hearts, and the evidence supports it. And God has convinced our hearts of that. It's historically true. And here it is. All these secularists who read the book of Daniel for a living will comment on it and write books about it and talk about how this had to be written after the fact. One of the problems they have is that Daniel 9, the 70 weeks, takes you all the way to the time of Christ. So it's a little hard. They still have to have Daniel written in the 2nd century BC. How do you do that? How do you handle that one? And Jesus even talks about Daniel already being written. He's Daniel the prophet. It's already been written. But there's one guy I ran into who dates the book of Daniel after Jesus. And I think earlier I told you eventually, they're going to keep pushing it back, and and Daniel was written during the Clinton administration. Yeah, so I just know it's really strange and bizarre what they say on that side of the ledger, and we need to be careful to hold our ground and not be afraid of them. One last slide. There is, by the way, that worst time that's said there. There'll be a time of trouble, verse 1, such as never has been. Later on, he asked, how long? In verse 6, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? He's asking how long that time is. And he says, I heard the man, I'm reading here in verse 7, I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. That's 3.5 years. And of course, I take Jewish reckoning on that. And then everything comes to an end. Okay, now, then at the end of the book, there is this strange numbers. It says, verse 11, and from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end. Now, what in the world is he talking about with those numbers? Okay, I've tried to, this is what I think is happening. 1,260 days is the 3.5 years of the last 3.5, the worst of the worst times. He just told us time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years. I think that is 1,260 days, Jewish reckoning. But he says 1,290 days from here, the time that the sacrifices stopped. Remember the Antichrist, Daniel 9, breaks off the sacrifices halfway through the trib. He breaks his treaty. Go back in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And so that happens here. You go 1,290 days, and you end up here. You got 30 days here. But then, 1,300, he says, blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. Okay, does that mean this? And so that goes 45 more days, so there's 75 days here. Well, this seems to be area for the judgment of the nations and clean up from the trib. You know, a lot of times we think it's kind of like Samantha the witch. You can just twitch your nose, God will just twitch his nose and everything's, I don't think it's going to be that way. We're actually going to do stuff. When Jesus comes, we're going to be part of cleaning up, helping the birds, this judgment of the nations, that's not going to take 5 seconds. Right? But then this one, is so positive, isn't it? Blessed is he who waits and arrives at this. And, and that's prep for the kingdom. I mean, we got a big celebration coming. The coronation of the king. You think that's going to be just, oh, he's just there. No. We're going to have a big to-do. And I hold the view that the marriage supper and the millennial kingdom are the same thing. We're going to have a big party for 1,000 years to celebrate God's eternal kingdom. That's my view on that. But anyway, this is a possibility. I'm not dogmatic about this at all. I'm trying to figure out what's in this 30 days, what's in this 45 days. This is positive, so it's maybe preparation for this, which means, okay, coronation stuff. And this is more negative, clean up from the trib, and maybe that's part of what that means. It's hard to say, but that's my best shot at that. One more. I lied. There's one more slide. The final word to Daniel is a good word to us. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest. Now, so go your way until the end. Okay, the end of what? It says, for you shall rest. Okay, he's going to die. I think that's a euphemism for die. You'll die and will arise. And that's a good word to us, by way of application. We should just carry on till the Lord takes us home or takes us up in the rapture, whichever comes first. We just do our thing, serving the Lord with all of our hearts, without any reservation, holding nothing back. We just do our stuff like Daniel. And then if we die, God will raise us up and we'll receive our inheritance at the end of the days. And frankly, I wish God would hit the fast forward button and get us there. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you for your written